Okay, hello everybody and welcome. It's James Dearsley here from the Digital Marketing Bureau, and we are on the What Does the Data Tell You show. This is actually the most relaxing show that I do because the midweek marketing mix is absolutely full on with all the guests coming in and all these different things, and everyone can have a 10-minute segment. So this is quite a relaxing one. But I'm here joined by a good friend of mine, Dan Hare from Communicator, and we'll touch on what Dan's doing, and we're going to talk about email analytics today. But what I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, as I always do, before the start of the show. Now, I use the Showcase app, which some people like, some people don't like, but I use it predominantly for the recording, so people can get access to interesting links that we're talking about. So for those of you who are watching this live in Google+, if you want to put comments, and please do, on the event page, basically just above my head, there's a little square with an arrow in it, a diagonal arrow, which if you click on that, it takes the event page into its own separate window, and then you can carry on commenting and asking questions to any of us, or just commenting on what you're seeing in front of you. If you are watching this outside of Google+, or you're watching a recording, then in the bottom left or right-hand corner, there's a little box there saying "Be part of the conversation," which will open up this in a new window with all of the links for you as well. We're also using the Applause app, which again it's a new addition within Google+, which basically allows you to sort of state when you're happy about something or what you think is something that's pretty positive that's been said. So I urge you, if you're watching live or recorded, to use that Applause app and make sure that you do, if there's something which is particularly pertinent or particularly important that you feel for others to recognize in the video, just click the thumbs up and the hooray, and at least then we know where we are with everything. And I think it's a particularly useful, if sometimes when you're doing it live, a bit of a difficult app to take on. But anyway, look, we are with Dan here from Communicator, and Dan, hello. It's been a while, you and I.
Hi, James.
Hello, mate. So why don't you just, let's start this off. I tell you what, we're talking about analytics here a little bit. What are your thoughts on email analytics in particular as a subset of the analytics genre? How important is it?
Well, email analytics, like all forms of analytics, there is no shortage of data available. Pretty much anything we want to measure, we can. And I'm a firm believer of beginning with the end in mind. So rather than just looking through statistics aimlessly, I'm a big fan of, knowing what you want to achieve up front. So if there is a purpose behind an email campaign, you should have a good idea of what success looks like. And then, frankly, you use whichever data sources and analytics tools you have available to you to prove or disprove whether you've hit that objective. And from our own perspective, we get very specific about that. We measure it in pounds and pennies. So how many sales opportunities, how many things that we want to sell come from our campaigns, and we've had that full end-to-end audit trail. I can see, where a deal has come from, right back to the original communications that first introduced us to a potential customer.
Yeah, I think it's part of the reason why we do the show, really, which is because I'm a big believer that as marketeers and companies in particular, if they're not aware of their analytics and how they're using them, how can they necessarily manage it? I'm just going to screen share because it's one of my favourite quotes when I'm talking about the analytics. It's just from this guy here. He was a management consultant, an American Austrian, I think. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, which is a gentleman by the name of Peter Drucker. And I think that is so unbelievably important, whether you're dealing with email analytics or whether you're dealing with, social analytics, which is really what we're looking at here. So I suppose part and parcel, that's why we put this data show together, which is really to help people understand what's going on with all their marketing and so on and so forth. So tell us, where do we go with email analytics? What are the starts? What can you measure?
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do, if it's all right, I'm going to take you through the process of the various different key points where we measure the performance of an email campaign, and indeed measure the performance of our marketing in the more general sense, because there are, like I said, there are so many different things to measure, and obviously at various different stages of the process, there are certain aspects of email marketing and indeed other communications where you have data which you can then use to make informed decisions as to how you perhaps adjust your future campaigns, your future marketing attempts. So if it's all right, I'll pop my screen share on now, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead. And as you're doing that, I see Lee. Yeah, you keep smacking the thumbs like mad on that applause app. Thanks so much for that. I do appreciate it. And Candice, I've just got to mention, because I think every single week I bring this up. So Candice is checking in and tapping feet to warm up. So this is her geek dance. She always likes her geek dance on the data show. So thanks, Carmen. Glad you're here as well. So yeah, take it away then, Dan. How can we go with this?
Sure. So the first thing I'm going to talk about in email marketing, Kel Surprise, is opens. Okay. What happens when a lot of clients come to us is they say, well, are our emails any good? How do they compare to others within our industry? And it's an extremely difficult question to quantify because there's so many variables, and indeed, when you're talking about open rates and click-through rates, so what if they're good, bad, or indifferent? Again, have those activities actually led to things happening which you would regard as success? Have people done the things that you wanted them to do off the back of the campaign? So, as far as open rates and click-throughs are concerned, they are the traditional measurements in email marketing. However, I don't tend to rely on them particularly from the perspective of assessing the performance of an email campaign in the general sense. And the reason I don't like opens is, if someone has received your email communication and opened it and chosen to take no further action, is that something that you should really regard as a positive? Should you be saying, okay, so they've read what I've sent them and they've done nothing more? I would always question, whether that's actually something which we should measure as a positive. And indeed, the other deep flaw with opens is the inaccuracy in them, because all ESPs, ourselves included, we measure opens in the same way. There's a single pixel tracking image which is embedded in every email design, and we wait to see that image downloaded on our servers. And once that image has been downloaded on our servers, then obviously we record that as an open.
So Dan, just to go back for the sort of bring this back at a stage or two, what you're saying from the analytical side of things is that as a company, I think you said ESP, which, if I'm right, is that an email service provider?
Email service provider, yeah.
Fine. So from an email service provider's perspective, for your clients, when you're recommending them, you're saying you sent out an email, and you've got the open rates, and you're saying that the open rates aren't necessarily the best indication of a successful campaign. Is that what I'm understanding? Yeah,
absolutely. Because on the one hand, just because they've opened it, does that mean the message has resonated with them? I would contend that usually, if all they've done is open an email, all it means is your subject line and who the email was from interested them. They've therefore opened the communication. But if they've taken no further action past that point, then why is that a success? But the other probably bigger problem as far as open rates are concerned is they're a deeply flawed metric, because, as I said, we're all waiting for that pixel to be downloaded in the email to be able to tell that an email's been opened. And Microsoft Outlook, which from a business-to-business capacity is probably the primary device which is used to read emails from a desktop perspective, has the feature where images are blocked by default. So someone can still read your email in full, but if they don't download the images, we wouldn't regard that as an open. And perversely, on the other side of things, the most popular email client in the world now is iPhone's mail application. So it is the #1 device for consuming email on the planet. And Apple, obviously, from a usability perspective, treat things very differently because they haven't got the same security concerns as Microsoft. So therefore, it is a setting on your iPhone, but as a default, Apple's mail application will download all images when it receives emails when it's set to push, so that from a convenience perspective, those emails are there and ready for you to read when you get round to them. But the problem from an open tracking perspective is that means we've recorded an open just because the iPhone has already downloaded the images. It doesn't mean the email has actually been looked at. So you've got people.
So what you're saying there is that basically the biggest provider of email reading, email comprehension, is actually providing false figures on the open rates that you're sending out.
Absolutely.
Christ, so
now there are ways to track it. The technology does exist to be able to get a more accurate measure on that, but most tools will use the basic crude pixel image tracking, and as a consequence, there's quite a margin for error in those figures. So the perverse situation is you've got people reading your emails on Microsoft Outlook, and you're not recording that as an open, and you've got people on the iPhone who aren't reading your emails, and you are recording that as an open.
And let me just bring this up from Lee. I'm presuming, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're talking about an iPhone. I agree with Daniel. What about the people like me that has an external images turned off? So I presume, like with Outlook, if you've got images turned off on your iPhone, that also won't measure as an open.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a sweeping generalization, but what we find for most people is they use the default settings. So the default on Microsoft Outlook is images are all blocked, and the default on an iPhone is images are all enabled. But obviously, people can change those settings. And the other interesting thing is Google used to do the same thing. Gmail used to block all images as a default, and at the end of last year, they changed that because they now cache all the images on their own servers. And the data that we have on open rates from Litmus and various others, there was a massive jump, like 7% swing in the space of a month, where all of a sudden Gmail became a much more used email client as far as open tracking was concerned. It wasn't that more people had started using opening emails on Gmail, it was just that Gmail changed the default, and as a consequence, all the email providers started recording more opens. So it's a deeply flawed metric.
So,
but that's not to say they haven't got their uses.
So it's the first takeaway from this, which is basically, from an analytical perspective, when you're looking at your email campaigns, is have a word of caution when it comes to
there's a margin of error in all open rates, but that's not to say they don't have their use. And the primary way in which I use open rates is in split testing. Okay, so most email campaigns that we will send at least 2 versions of the subject line, because again, the vast majority of emails are never actually opened and read. Everyone will have a level of non-engagement in their email marketing database. So what we try and do is ensure that when we send email communications out, we spend an awful lot of time thinking about the subject line, because it is the one thing which can make a massive difference in terms of the number of people that are attracted to the email. So if we accept that all open rates have a margin for error in them, we don't use them as a method of tracking the performance of an email campaign in the general sense, but we can use it as a way of measuring the performance of one subject line over another. Now, obviously, when the figures are very close, then it's not of much use. But when you get very large differences in the percentages, then that will be a good, solid indication of one particular subject line working better than one of the others. And from a subject line perspective, I'm always trying to get clients to make sure there's something relevant to the recipient in there. But if you can't do relevancy, then the other trick is to make sure there's something remarkable in your subject line. So although a lot of people don't like them, we have a large body of evidence to suggest that symbols in your subject line will cause an uplift in this particular campaign. Almost double the number of people engaging with the version of the subject line with the symbols compared to the one that's not. The other trick at the moment that a lot of people are trying are single word subject lines. Okay, something with a sort of curiosity factor. And again, the differences in the percentages are significant enough to suggest that this subject line, breakfast ? Performed much better than breakfast briefing June 24th.
And Dan, if I can just bring it back just for 1 second before you jump on, just to put this in context of what you're saying when it comes to the data, is that though you can't trust necessarily your open rate, what you can do is you can do this sacred word of the alpha beta splits, where you can say this subject line against this subject line, and because it's sending to the same data set, if I'm correct, you should be able then to see sort of some fair relevance of this subject line works better than that subject line. Yeah,
absolutely. If we accept that there is a margin for error in all that open tracking, what we then need to do is say, okay, we can use it as a guide. And when I'm talking about split testing on subject lines, the other thing is, it needs to go to a fair few people. I would normally put a minimum of a couple of thousand people for the split test, because if it's any less than that, then effectively you haven't got statistical validity in terms of the number of people that actually open it. obviously we send campaigns for clients where they're sending 1 million at a time. So it's always quite lucky when we can do a split test to sort of 100,000, because that gives us a much more robust set of data to work from. So there is a margin for error in open rates, but if we accept that it's the same margin for error across the board, then obviously what we can use open rates for is to look at split testing and obviously assess the performance of different subject lines.
Right, got you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So what other ones have we got in terms of the subject lines? So we've already talked about having symbols in there to somehow differentiate you. You've got the ability to just have one single word.
Single word, yep.
Okay. And then what else have we got there?
So it's I have seen people try lots of other tricks, and one of my other favourites is the deliberate spelling mistake.
Sorry, I'm just laughing. Come off the. Let me just. Okay.
Yeah. So
Right.
yeah. So like I say, the idea here being is just putting something in that opening gambit which is going to stand out. Okay. And from our own perspective, just being a little bit more sensible about it. You know, we do seminars all very regularly. So I do live events as well as webinars like this, and we're continuously testing the invitations to our various events to see what works best. And obviously, you know, if I get 22% on one version but 7% on the other, if I then take that number forward to a number of bums on seats for an event, then ultimately, if I only attracted 7% rather than 22%, it probably means ultimately I'm going to end up with a lot less people in the room. Okay. Yeah. But obviously, the assessment of the performance in terms of getting people, sat and in the room, that's where I look beyond the opens. You know, that's where we look at clicks and indeed something called lead score, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks. So,
the other thing that we obviously look at is click-through rates. Okay, and click-throughs again, it's really quite a subjective area because click-through rates will quite simply be influenced by the quality of your content and also by the quality of how you present your content. Okay, so what we see is a lot of people in email marketing, they have quite dull and innocuous calls to action in their emails. They put something dull like click here or read more or find out more, and you know, a little bit like this.
Oh, you still there, Dan? Have you gone?
The things that we find tend to work well in terms of influencing those click-through rates are to use words like best and very best, you know, something to emphasize the positivity. We also find that putting verbs in the calls to action, again, will cause an uplift. So learn about the best email marketing tips, you know, tell people what to do. And then we've got the BuzzFeed principle, 10 of the best email marketing tips ever, okay? Whenever you quantify, again, we tend to see an uplift in click-through rates. So, you know, your click-through rate is partly down to your content, but it's also down to how you present that content. And what we find is, you know, sometimes a little bit like the subject line is an afterthought to some people, the call to action, the text that they put in an email, which is encouraging someone to click through to their website, can also sometimes be quite dull. So, you know, ordinarily I would expect click here and read more, and find out more, to not perform half as well as things like these. The other thing we do with calls to action in our emails is we make them blue and we make them underlined, which is a little tip we picked up off of Google, because you know, to Google is a verb, and you know, we all know when we Google for something, we click on the blue underline bit. So it's sort of a universal truth. My 5-year-old son and my 92-year-old granny know that if a link is blue and underlined, they can click on it. Okay.
So just going back a step for us. Sorry, just to interrupt again.
Sure.
From an analytical perspective, just as a summary, what we're saying is open rates, a little bit difficult to sort of work out if it's true or not. Click-through rates are far more accurate in terms of the success of a campaign.
Yeah. But again, all they're doing is really telling you whether the way that you presented your content has resonated with your audience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I suppose looking at it really, really crudely, we're assuming here that the click-through to the website is the most important thing. which I suppose in 99% of all emails it probably is. So
most emails it is now. Yeah, I mean, obviously as we do more stuff in the mobile space, we are seeing some success whereby clients are getting people to initiate phone calls from the back of emails. So you can code your emails responsively now, so that when they scroll to the bottom of the email, there is effectively what looks like a call button within the email design. It's called click to call basically, and obviously as people are consuming the content on their mobile device, they're able to then initiate a phone call to the right number from the email itself, which is obviously a click activity that we can still track. But yeah, generally speaking, most email marketing will drive people to web pages, to blog posts, to events, sign-up forms, whatever piece of content it might be. It tends to be web-based.
Okay, and then just going back to, I think it was one of the slides you had earlier on in terms of, I seem to remember it was acquisition and retention.
Yep.
Was that general click-through rate data that has been collated by the UK Email Council? Was that what it was?
Yeah, so
what can we expect?
What we get asked all the time is are my emails any good? So the data that I usually then throw people is from the Email Marketing Council. It's a bit like Lord of the Rings, Council of Elrond. We'll get around this big table with big wooden chairs, but effectively this is, if you like, the notional de facto standard metrics for the industry. Acquisition emails obviously being ones where you're trying to sell some stuff to people that you don't have a relationship with, and retention emails being ones where you are effectively targeting existing customers.
Okay, so let's just, if you wouldn't mind, we'll just talk about this for a second, because this is classic use of analytics, and hopefully it will give people a good idea of where we are. So if you can just bring that screen share up once more for me, Dan, just so we can just sort of talk it through. So on the figures there, I presume when you're talking about hard bounces, I think if I remember correctly, the acquisition there, 85% of those are delivered. And am I right in saying it's 9% of that total is then hard bounced, or is that 9% of the total of 100%, for example?
So 85% is delivered, 9% is hard bounce. In other words, it's not delivered, and 6% of it is soft bounce. So again, not delivered.
Total,
so
right?
85 plus 9 plus 6 gives you 100.
Cool. 25% open rate.
Yeah.
Is that 25% of the 85, or is that 25%?
Yeah, that's 25% of the 85. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And same with the 6%. So basically, what we're looking at is that 1/4 of people that you send an email to on an acquisition basis, i.e., you have no relationship with them at all, will generally, on average, open up your email. And
yeah, as I say, they're such sweeping generalizations. I show them because it's always what we get asked. But for me, I don't care if 1% of people click through from my email, but that 1% go on and book my course or attend my event or buy my product, then frankly, I'm happy.
Absolutely, yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and I think Christopher's got a classic here, which is OMG, the vortex.
Yeah. Ever decreasing circles. Yeah.
But I think it's a particularly pertinent thing because it might be second nature for you being in the industry. For most people who do send out their monthly overviews and newsletters, you're going to tell me, I'm sure, newsletter is the worst term ever to use. But so we're looking. I certainly
wouldn't use it in a subject line. Oh look, another newsletter. How exciting! It's sort of a red flag to someone to ignore that email. So if you are sending out newsletters, then obviously in the subject line have something which gets them excited about what they will find within that newsletter. So avoid structural language like update and newsletter and stuff like that. We tend to see lower performance of those sorts of campaigns.
Okay, fair enough. And so what we're looking at in terms of, and just because I've forgotten it already, you're looking at open rates, which are neither here nor there. We've got the click-through rates, which I think from memory you had there about 5%, 6% to 9%. I think it was, whether or not if you knew them already. So I think that's particularly useful. And I think if I remember correctly, we then went on to the talk of how to increase click-through rates in emails.
Yeah.
Of which some of your recommendations was don't use the bland generalized read more, find out more, whatever it was, because people, it's not an incentive to click through. But by
I don't need someone to tell me to click here. We're all fairly intelligent when it comes to what we can do with an email. So as I say, a blue underlined link will ordinarily tell everybody instinctively this is where they can click.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Okay, fine, thanks, Dan.
Cool.
What else have we got from an analytical side of things to sort of help us with our email marketing? Is there anything else that you got from sort of top tips and tricks that we can look at and use?
Well, what I'd like to do, if it's all right, James, in the couple of minutes we've got left, is just show you where we ultimately get to as far as measurement of our performance of our marketing is concerned, if that's all right.
Absolutely, go for it.
So, although we are an email marketing business, I don't actually worry too much about email marketing in terms of its performance. Where I'm really focused is on my website. Who am I driving to my website and what are they up to? All right, and we have a set of technologies which enable you to effectively get a very clear idea of what's going on. Okay, so we use UTM values in all our social and all our email marketing. Everything's encoded with a full set of UTM values, which obviously you will then see in Google Analytics. And if
just 1 second, UTM meaning
in tracking mechanism. So Google Analytics was originally called Urchin, and the company Urchin was acquired by Google, and UTMs were just something which they couldn't get shot of, basically. So they've always been there. So the way a UTM value works is effectively in a link you pass across UTM values to the website link, and it basically tells Google Analytics and other analytics applications where that link came from. Okay, so effectively it enables you to then do things like segment the traffic within your Google Analytics by medium and by campaign. And if sorry, I'm just getting a bit of a muddle with the screen sharing.
No, that's all right. Don't worry. I'll tell you what, just while you're there and you're filling it out, because I know.
There you go. So
do two things.
I'm now in my Google Analytics, and basically I'm using segmentation to see the traffic to my website by medium. Okay, so I'm looking at the performance of email marketing versus organic traffic versus Twitter in this particular instance, so I can get a sense of how the different channels are performing in terms of driving traffic to my website, and then obviously all the other things that you might want to measure as in traditional Google Analytics. So the other thing with UTM values is it will pass UTM campaign values through. So therefore, that means in the acquisition menu in Google Analytics, you can go into campaigns, and you can then see the campaigns that are working. So they see webinar invite, Gator Comms,
and this is
non-tech Tuesday send. So that's where I'm getting a measure in Google Analytics of what's happening with my various different email communications on my website.
And this is by making sure that the UTM values are in, try and de-technologicalize the term. How can we embed this UTM?
So our technologies put UTM values in all links as a default. But most other applications do now. Most of the email service providers do. Things like Hootsuite does it, or well, it doesn't do it by default. I think you have to have the paid version of Hootsuite. But yeah, most applications will enable you to embed UTM values in your links, and it just gives you the audit trail in terms of where people came from when they come onto your website. Okay.
Yeah, got you. Okay.
So what UTMs enable me to do is then get a measure of what's been happening on my website. Okay, so effectively I can see where people have come from on my website. But the other thing we do, which is quite different in terms of the way that we track the performance of our marketing, is we use IP lookup and we use cookie tracking to tell you who's been on the website and what they've been looking at. Okay, so whereas Google Analytics will obviously tell you how many people have been looking at certain things, we will tell you who has been looking at specific things. Okay, and then if I jump across to our analytics tool, which is called Wow Analytics, effectively this is what I'm looking at here is my website for today. Okay, so I've got a number of cookie tracked contacts whereby I've served them emails in the past, and when they clicked on a link in the email, I've cookied their machine, and as a consequence, I can then track their actions on my website. Okay, so I can then see the company they're from, I can see information about those businesses, and and I can obviously see the individual as well. And then I can look at that in more detail. So if I drill into the detail there, I can see the pages they've visited. I can see the top pages they visited. Sorry, the last 10 pages they visited and the top 10 pages they visited, and I can see the number of sessions that they've had on the website. Okay, so I've got complete visibility in terms of who's been on my website and what they're up to. Okay, and then like I say, the same as Google Analytics, I can then look at particular UTM values and I can say, well, show me all the people that have come from Twitter or from LinkedIn or email, etc., etc. Excuse me. Or indeed, I can look at particular campaigns, activity that I want to have a look at. Then effectively, I can see the people that have been driven to my website from that particular marketing activity. Okay, but then obviously that gives me who they are and where they've came from. The other piece of the puzzle is what they do. Okay, so that's where we use something called lead scoring. Okay, and lead scoring is a very simple principle.
Just one thing. Sorry, Dan. Just to interrupt before you jump on, because what you've just gone through there is an awful lot of numbers very, very quickly in terms of the.
Sorry, James, I just touched the time.
No, don't worry. Look, we've got time, because obviously when it comes to the numbers, it's very interesting to do. And what I will stress here actually is that if anybody wants to speak to Dan or look at communicate a little bit further, there's all the links in the Showcase app that you can sort of get in contact with them and so on and so forth. But it is just one question which came in from Christopher, which I think is a particularly pertinent one for this sort of stuff. What if people are using a number of different IP addresses? Does this confuse the metrics? I don't know if you've got it's quite a direct question, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Dan.
So that's where we use the combination of IP lookup and cookie tracking. Okay, so what we have a database, something in the region of 2 million UK VAT registered businesses in our database, and we hold multiple IP addresses for a lot of companies. If I'm using IP lookup alone, what I can't do is, if you then go to Starbucks and use their internet connection there, I can't still tell that it's you. But if I've emailed you and the cookie continues to live on your computer, then it doesn't matter about the IP address. So my objective ordinarily is, when I can identify the companies that have come onto my website with IP lookup, then I can target the relevant individuals within that business, send them emails, and if they then engage with those emails, then I know I've got them. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, people clear their cookies, but what we experience is people don't, because that means they lose passwords and things like that. So as a consequence, unless you have very stringent security measures in place, most people just do not clear their cookies anymore. So yeah, effectively, we can never give you 100% accuracy, but what we can do is give you an awful lot more than what you tend to get, with Google Analytics. I mean, Google Analytics does give you IP lookup information as well, but what it will tend to tell you is, Virgin Media and BT and Sky have been on your website, and it's obviously not them; it's their customers who are using those ISPs for their internet connection. Whereas we can dig a little bit deeper into the actual sort of company at the end of a particular IP address.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly valuable, obviously, for B2B stuff, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, that technology does have a primary use in B2B, but in a B2C capacity, obviously, the cookie tracking is, perfectly valid. And obviously, it's not a new thing. Amazon have been doing it for years. They track your behaviors. When you look at certain things on their website, they start sending you emails based on what you were looking at before, and it's a very similar principle, really.
Absolutely. Christopher says lead scoring is not boring.
Lead scoring is not boring. Oh no, lead score is fantastic. I mean, let's say lead score we use all the time. It's our primary method of assessing whether someone is interested in us. So effectively, every page on your website carries a score, and the more you look at, the higher your score gets. And then we put people into what we call lead bands. So in other words, most of the visitors to our website, they won't have looked at very much. They might have looked at a blog post or two, and we give them a few points for doing that. But as they engage with more content, and indeed as they engage with important content, download white papers, register to attend events, their lead score will increase. So it's a cumulative thing. Sometimes we're looking for very specific actions. Oh, someone looked at my pricing page, therefore they're a viable lead. Okay, but not everybody operates in the same way. So sometimes you will have quite random customer journeys on your website where people will look at a whole bunch of different stuff. But if that cumulative behavior adds up to them having quite a high lead score, then obviously that's a flag to you that this is an opportunity which needs to be followed up with.
And I presume, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, I mean, there's an awful lot of talk in email marketing, about the email nurturing side of the world. And it seems to me that if you are lead scoring, you should be lead nurturing those leads as well, which I presume is automatically portable within certain systems, like Communicator, for example.
This is where it becomes all cyclical, because effectively, what a lot of businesses still do is they buy data, okay, and they send emails to non-engaged people who never ask for those communications, and we find, they don't perform particularly well, they get reported for spam, and slowly but surely the wheels come off. Whereas obviously if you can target the people that have been on your website, if you already have contact details for them, great. If you don't, you only acquire email addresses and try and source contact information for people that have got some form of interest because you've seen them on your website, okay? And then obviously if you can track them onto your website and you can see what they've been up to, you can then add them to programs of communication, lead nurture programs, where they are sent emails which reflect what they seem to be interested in by virtue of their website behavior. So, effectively what we try and do is make sure that the analytics tools, the data that we've got, enables us to communicate with people more effectively. We can be more targeted, and we can stop sending generic emails to all and sundry, and we can start sending more specific emails based on particular activities on our website.
Okay. Well, look, I'm going to draw this into a little bit of a close because
sure.
We normally sort of say half an hour, and what I never want to do is I never want to put upon people's time too much. I just want to bring in a couple of comments because we got this just a very quick answer ready to this one. Will this work in the US if most of the data is gleaned from the UK?
So the short answer to that, Chris, is yes. Our match rates in the UK are our best match rates. However, we do have quite a few US clients now as well, and obviously, it depends on the industries that you're targeting as to whether we've got the data. There is a lot more publicly available IP information in the US than there is in the UK. So, yeah, I don't have the figures to hand. Yes, I know we absolutely rock in the UK, but we have got quite a few US clients as well.
Cool. And then just bring
We're very good in Denmark as well, apparently, for some reason. I don't know why.
In Denmark, there's only about 5 people in Denmark. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Carmen just says, I am getting geeky. I love all the organised numbers. And just to bring this question in, because I have to say, I've tried this, Carmen. This was in reference to something earlier. Start with a question to catch someone's attention on your email subject line. And we've done some testing on that, and that works particularly well. Dan, have you found that? Can you reinforce those numbers?
Your avatar says it all, Colin. So an old friend of mine used to talk about being catmatic rather than dogmatic. So being dogmatic is an arrogant assertion. So when you want to tell somebody something, if you pose it as a question, they will tend to receive that better. So obviously, when you are doing remarketing and lead nurture based on where you've seen someone doing something on the website, then yes, absolutely. If you pose it as a question rather than a statement, I would tend to expect you to see a better result.
Catmatic rather than dogmatic. I love that.
Yeah, so catmatic rather than dogmatic. And as you saw with that example with the single word subject line, that was posed as a question. Breakfast ?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a little bit of that with some of our clients, which is shortening and question mark. It makes a massive difference. We don't really want to go into too much on this a little bit, but there's a couple of questions about different analytics programs other than Google Analytics. And Lee has just come up, I don't know if you're familiar with this, with piwik.org. Have you ever heard of those guys?
No, sorry, not au fait with that one.
No, it's just for everybody's information that's here. I just brought it up earlier. So piwik.org, open source web analytics platform. So if any of you out there are particularly keen on looking at website analytics, which is perhaps an alternative to GA, then there's an option there for you. Yeah, okay. Somebody's looking at it might be fine. All right. Well, I think that'll do for most of that sort of stuff. Just one thing for you, Dan, really. Love the name Communicator. Dan Hare. Sounds snappy and filled with jaw-like danger.
Very good.
There we go. Save that one for the end. But look, Dan, thanks ever so much for all your time. On that showcase app which you've got on there, we've got quite a few things, including, let me just remember, we've got the Dan's Google Plus profile, we've got the Communicator. They've actually got a guide to email marketing, which I've actually linked to on the showcase, which you can download and have a look at. I've had a look at it earlier. It's pretty comprehensive, along with some of the email automation stuff and just some other general information on there, which I hope you find useful. But I'm going to leave it at that. Dan, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, and no doubt we will speak again pretty soon. So really, thanks for your time. Thanks everybody for watching, and
Thanks, James. Thanks everybody.
Lovely, and hope to see you next week. So next week, just so that all of you are aware, it's back to the midweek marketing manic mix that we have. We've got a really good, interesting show. We've got Ryan Hanley talking about his content warfare book and the story of how he got his book published using pretty much social proof, which is an interesting story. So we've got him coming on as a special guest. We've got a merging of shows. We've got the midweek marketing mix is mixing with the G Plus spotlights. We've got Stefan Havananan and Ben Fisher coming on, amongst other guests as well, which should be a really interesting show for us all to have. So that's next week, Wednesday, 5 o'clock BST, 12 p.m. EST, and 9 a.m. PST. So I hope you'll all join with them. Leaves me to say, look, thanks ever so much from you, Dan. One final word from these guys. Meow. Can't say further than that.
Gators, hares, and cats. Great.
And I'll leave you to it. So, Dan, thanks for your time, and speak to you all very soon.